I've ranked the top 20 prospects in the Mets system, and on today's show, we're talking about number 11 to 20 on my list.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the number one sports podcast network. On the show today, we're talking prospects. I'll open it up, talking about the guys that just missed my list of the top 10 in the Mets system. Then we'll round out the top 20, and we're going to close out the show going through the names that were released from the New York Mets roster at the non-tender deadline. We'll also go through if there was any other notable ones around the league that could interest the Mets in free agency. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the number one daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. And for those of you who missed my list of the top 10 prospects in the Mets system, I will leave that episode linked in the description today, so you can go back and watch that. But here is the list. So a little spoiler alert if you want to catch that full show and listen 1 through 10 how I ranked them. But for anyone who's going to be wondering today, well, did Ryan mention this prospect? They were on that previous video. So here was the 1 through 10. Noel McLean, obviously the top prospect in the Mets system. Carson Bench checked in at number 2. Jonah Tong, number 3. Jet Williams, 4. Brandon Sproat, 5. AJ Ewing, 6. Ryan Clifford, 7. Jacob Reimer, 8. Jonathan Santucci, 9. And then Jack Weninger rounded out the top 10. So you can go back and watch that for all the analysis of those prospects. For the first guy off of the top 10, the first just missed from the top 10 list, I had Elian Pena. Where do you put a teenager on a top prospect list? It's tough because upside-wise, how many guys in the Mets system have the upside of Elian Pena? But he's a teenager. The Mets signed him for $5 million. For context, that's the highest they've ever paid for an international player. It also was about 80% of their bonus pool last year. Teams get a certain amount of money they can allocate to international free agency. And that bonus pool for the Mets in 2024, the 2025 class, was $6.26 million. Of that $6.26 million, Pena got $5 million of it. So they only had $1.26 million to spread across the rest of their international class. And you can sign guys for $10,000. So you can spread that out. But it just shows you how much they value this guy, that they pretty much hinged their entire class internationally last year on Elian Pena. And early on, the returns weren't great. He was 0 for 26 to start off his season in the Dominican Summer League, but then he figured it out. And from that point on, he hit .342, a .463 on base, a .618 slug. So his OPS was well over 1,000. 9 home runs. He had 2 different 3 home run games. He hit 3 home runs in a game multiple times in a league where people don't homer much in the Dominican Summer League. 13 doubles, 1 triple, 18 stolen bases after the 0 for 26 start, but he swiped 3 before he even got a hit. So 21 stolen bases. Unbelievable season when you put it all together. He also had a 4 stolen base game throughout this year as well. So he had a couple games where he was just an absolute monster and showed that he was the best player on the field. He was the player of the year in the Dominican Summer League across the board, and obviously for the Mets. So just a really great start to his professional career. I would expect him to start this next season stateside in the Florida Complex League after the way that he was able to tear up the Dominican Summer League when it was all said and done. How quickly will he adjust? Who knows? He just turned 18 last month. So still a lot ahead for Elian Pena, a lot that has to be proven. Didn't have the best season when it came to errors. I mean, he made a bunch of errors at shortstop, but he's just a super athletic prospect. Who knows where he can go, honestly? I mean, he could, in 2 years, be the number one prospect in the Mets system. That can happen. And he very well could skyrocket into the top 10, even high up into the top 10 after this season, because you're going to have a lot of graduations from the Mets list here. Like Nolan McLean is barely even a prospect anymore. Carson Bench could open up the season on the big league roster. Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat, even Jet Williams. So you have a lot of guys that could come off of this list. But Elian Pena is going to force his way into the top 10. He's just outside of it because there's still a lot to be determined about him. There's still a lot that he has to prove. But it was a great start in the DSL. Number 12 on my list is Will Watson. So if you're looking at the Mets farm system, you got McLean, Tong, Sproat. That's tier A. You then have Jonathan Santucci and Jack Weninger, who round that at my top 10, who are in tier B. And Will Watson is right there. Like, he is right behind those guys to me as far as being an arm that I'm really excited to watch in 2026. He was a two-way player in college, but gave up the bat going into the 2024 season. He pitched at USC 50 and a third innings in 2024. So this was his first full season in 2025 as a starting pitcher. He opened up 2024 in the bullpen and worked his way into the rotation at USC, which is very impressive anyway. 7th round pick in 2024. It's a nice round for the Mets because Jonah Tong was selected in the 7th round back in 2022. And this season, Will Watson pitched to a 3.66 ERA in St. Lucie. That was 10 games, 8 starts, struck out 43 and 39 and a third innings pitch. Gets up to high A and absolutely dominates. Pitches to a 1.70 ERA across 14 games, 13 starts, struck out 67 and 63 in 2/3 innings pitched. He added a strikeout to his strikeout per 9 rate, going from low A to high A, and then maintained that. So his strikeout per 9 was in the double digits in high A and double A. He struck out 22 batters in 18 and a third innings pitched once he got up to double A. That was only in 4 appearances. So there is a lot to like with Will Watson. Altogether, a 2.60 ERA and 3 stops, 121 and a third innings pitched. So a big spike in innings for him. That was a great sign if he wants to stick in a rotation. A really good sort of foundation for what we're going to watch the next couple of years as he tries to go through the Mets system and hopefully be a starting pitcher when he debuts in the big leagues. Struck out 142 batters and then in those 121 and a third innings pitched. He has a great slider. That's a real weapon against right-handed pitching. He also has a really good changeup against lefties. The fastball is actually the pitch that I think is going to make or break him in a lot of ways because it does sit 95, but right now hitters are still able to get on that fastball. So does he go to a sinker? Does he add some variation? Does he add a tick to the fastball, which would take the arsenal up to a whole nother level? There's definitely some reliever risk here, but with the reliever risk, the fact that he has a good weapon for righties and a good weapon for lefties, if that fastball does tick up in shorter spurts out of the bullpen, you have a chance for a really good reliever, but there's still enough hope that he can be a starting pitcher if he rounds out that arsenal a little bit, maybe gets a 4th pitch. He's working on the cutter, but that's still definitely a work in progress. That would give him a pitch that was sort of in between the fastball and the slider velocity-wise. So that's a nice change of pace pitch for him. Again, maybe there's a sinker that he starts to work in more. We'll see how the Mets sort of refine that arsenal. They're very good at adding a pitch here, adding a pitch there. Maybe, you see all of a sudden he comes out with a different breaking ball. So not only does he have a slider, if he's very comfortable with a slider, maybe he has a curveball too. And that just gives him another tool in that toolkit. But a guy that, again, I think you have that upside of a really good reliever if he doesn't make it work as a starter, but a really good first full season as a starting pitcher, getting over 100 innings pitched, and he'll have all of 2026 in Double A to continue to improve on this, and we'll see where he ends up. But definitely a really exciting pitching prospect that I think is, again, just a tick below what you have with Santucci and Weninger, who are that next wave after the 3 that we saw debuted at the end of the 2025 season. Rounding out the group that I would say was I wouldn't really call them in consideration for the top 10, because I think the Mets have a pretty I don't think there's much debate about who the top 10 prospects in the Mets system are right now, but these are the guys that I think can very easily get into that top 10 with some graduations this year. The guys that we've spent a lot of time talking about this offseason, frankly, because they've been in the Arizona Fall League, Chris Suero and Nick Morabito are in that grouping to me that are really close to being top 10 prospects and maybe even top 10 talents that just can't quite make it in a very deep system for the Mets. Suero I have ahead of Morabito, but you could have flipped the coin for me. I just like Chris Suero because it's such a fun profile. We see a lot of guys. Well, I don't want to diminish Nick Morabito, but speedy center fielders, that's a profile that you see. The guy that can catch, play outfield, play first base, and bring some pop to the table while still being an elite base runner who stole 35 bags, that's a different player. You don't see a lot of archetypes like Chris Suero. He ended up, if you include the Fall League, finishing his calendar year in 2025 with 21 home runs in 130 games. He had 5 home runs in the Arizona Fall League, 16 during the regular season across Brooklyn and Double-A. He did struggle once he got to Double-A. His OPS in Brooklyn was 837. That dropped off to 697 once he got to Double-A, but I think some of those concerns might have been quelled when he went to the Arizona Fall League and posted a 920 OPS. Granted, limited sample, but it was only 41 games played in Double-A anyway. So we're talking about a really small sample with him facing the velocity that you're going to see in Double-A and in the Arizona Fall League. And I think that's the one question about Chris Suero. How is he going to adjust once he starts seeing better velocity more consistently? Because he's a great breaking ball hitter, destroyed sliders this past season, over 1,000 OPS against the slider. Guy that can definitely hit out those mistakes. A lot of pull side power, which is great. If you're going to pull the ball in the air, you got a good chance to run into those home runs like he did this past season. So if he can catch up to the fastball and continue to adjust to that as he sees better pitching throughout, his minor league career, there's a chance that this guy gets up and he's just an awesome piece on your bench that can be your third catcher, that can play left, play first, pinch run. I mean, just do a whole bunch of things for you. And we'll see where it ends up going from here. But he's still relatively young, too. He's still 21 years old, turns 22 in January. You still have one more year before you have to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. That decision will come next winter. And I think there's every chance that he'll be added to the 40-man roster if he can build off of what we saw this season. He'll have a full year in Double-A to adjust to that level. That's a big jump. But again, the fact that he held his own in the Arizona Fall League is really exciting. And I'm curious to see where next season goes for Chris Suero. But this is just a really fun player in this system that has a chance maybe to hit another level in 2026 if he can sort of round out that offensive game a little bit. It's exciting stuff for Chris Suero. And then, again, I don't want to diminish Nick Morabito. You're still talking about probably the fastest runner in the Mets system, a guy that plays a good center field and with more time out there could potentially play a great center field with that speed and athleticism. He was the Mets minor league prospect of the year in 2024, a breakout season where he hit about 424 games in St. Lucie with an OPS over 1,000, gets up to high A, hits 294, 747 OPS, stole 59 bases across both stops. Really good season. This year in 2025, I wouldn't even call it a step back. It was more just a much tougher level that he had to adjust to getting up to Double-A for a full season. And he held his own. He hit 273, 348 on base, 385 slug. He's never going to have a bunch of extra base hits and a bunch of power, but I was encouraged that in one less game played, he actually added 10 extra base hits. So there were some more doubles. There were, I think, a few more home runs. He did have a little bit more extra base promise this past season instead of just all singles, which is good. Stole 49 bases on 60 attempts. It'd be nice if he can be a little more efficient on the base pass. That might come with time. But he went to the Arizona Fall League and he hit 362 with a 914 OPS, and he stole 16 bases in 17 games. Again, fastest runner in this system, good center fielder, could be great. Hit tool is good right now. The question really with Morabito is, can he hold on to that batting average as he keeps climbing the levels? To me, you talk about St. Lucie. He's never going to sustain a 397 batting average. In St. Lucie, he could put the ball in play and get on base because the defense, the infields in low A baseball are just going to struggle to get a guy like Morabito. If he hits it to the left side, he's on first base. So get up to high A. There's still some of that. At every level that you go up, the better the defenders are, the more that a really fast runner is going to get out. But if he can hold on to that 270 batting average, once he gets up to the show, we're talking about a starting center fielder in the big leagues with the defensive value and what he brings to the base pass. If he is hitting at a 270 clip and getting on base at a 350 clip, that could be a starting center fielder. Now, if as he gets up to the highest level, if the batting average drops off to 250, if the on base drops off to 320, you're talking about a fourth outfielder. But a high probability big leaguer that was just added to the 40-man roster could factor into the Mets mix as soon as this upcoming season. I think he probably does need a full year in AAA, but now that you're on the 40, you never know what can happen. Nick Morabito, a very interesting prospect. Also one that I think to a certain extent could be available on the trade market this offseason just because maybe the Mets value AJ Ewing a little bit more, but still a really exciting player, a guy the Mets had to protect from the Rule 5 draft, and we'll see where things go from there. We still got plenty of prospects to discuss. We're going to round out the top 15 and keep moving down the list of the top 20 in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season's here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if it hits, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets. That's right. You pick a bet. You put down $5. If it hits, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes watching football even more exciting when you got a little bit of something riding on the action. Same thing with basketball. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel is going to make the game day experience so much better. It's quick, it's easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays as well as any game night. You got basketball action. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're nearly there. I'd love to get there by the end of the year. I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, number 15 on the Mets top prospect list here. I got Mitch Voit, and I do think this is where the Mets farm system drops off a little bit, and it's not a knock on Voit. He's just a guy that was just drafted in the first round. You're starting to try to find guys that have the upside, but maybe don't have enough of that track record just yet, but that still obviously will come with time. Again, this guy was literally just drafted this past July. He was the 38th pick in the draft, the Mets' first-round pick, but it drops 10 slots because of being a luxury tax repeat offender. A former two-way player that gave up pitching in 2025 at Michigan, had an electric season, posted a 1.140 OPS, 14 homers, 14 stolen bases in 56 games, gets picked by the Mets, plays 22 games in St. Lucie, and did struggle with the bat, a 638 OPS, but at the same time, he produced a lot of highlights, especially defensively at second base. He also stole 20 bases in 22 games. Across his entire collegiate career, Mitch Voit stole 14 bases. Gets into pro ball, swipes 20 bags in 22 games. So there is a lot to like here with just a very athletic player. He needs to improve the hit tool. There's still questions about how much power can he get into. He's raw, but he just turned 21 at the end of September. Super athletic. He gets that tagline of a gamer, really fiery competitor. Could be a great second baseman. He's not great now. He'll make the great play, but there's still more that needs to be rounded out in his game. But the athleticism is there for him to be potentially again, plus second baseman. And I think also that athleticism could translate to a utility type player. Maybe they get him some work at third. Maybe they stick him in a corner outfield spot, see how he does out there. There's a lot the Mets can do with Mitch Voit. I'm very curious how they will split up his playing time in 2026. Is it, all right, you're just a second baseman. Get as good as you can at second base and focus on the bat and don't worry about anything else. Or is it, all right, let's add a bunch of tools to a toolkit. Let's see what it looks like in left, in center. Just play around with him and see what you can find. But he's a fun prospect, and we'll just see what the first full season looks like. I really don't take too much stock in a 638 OPS in 22 games in low A. First year after a college season, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. We'll see what it looks like in a full year in 2026, where I'm sure he'll start right back in Port St. Lucie, but could find himself up in Brooklyn in no time. Number 16, we have Zach Thornton. We spent a lot of time talking about him during the season because his numbers were just so good. 5th round pick in 2023. Thornton's breakout season, of course, came this year as he pitched to a 0.44 ERA in 4 starts in Brooklyn. The Mets said, all right, we got to get this guy a tougher competition. Goes up to AA, pitches to a 2.60 ERA in 10 starts and 52 innings pitched. Then, unfortunately, his season got cut short due to an oblique injury. This is a very interesting pitcher because this stuff does not jump out. Okay, he does not throw 97 from the left side, but he's a pitchability lefty, and we're seeing a trend now in Major League Baseball where more and more of these pitchability lefties, your Ranger Suarez's, your Christopher Sanchez's, these guys who are able to just have a good sinker, throw strikes, good slider, and they end up just having a ton of success. So he sort of fits the mold of where the game is going a little bit. You saw David Peterson as a pitchability lefty have a ton of success this past season. Now, Peterson is a former first-round pick. He's 6'6" compared to Thornton at 6'3". But that's sort of the ceiling for Zach Thornton, right? Can he get to that point where his stuff plays in the zone well enough that he can have that success at the highest level? He does have the command. He does throw a lot of strikes. It's just a matter of, will his stuff play in the zone the more and more he, faces advanced hitters. But really good season. Unfortunate that it got cut short due to injury. I would love to see that sample size grow and see the innings, rack up a little bit for Thornton. But he'll be right back in AA, and he is, I think Will Watson sort of toggles between these two different tiers the Mets have when it comes to the wave of pitching prospects below, of course, those top 3. Again, you got McClain, Tong, Sproat. You have Weninger and Santucci. Will Watson is kind of there, but he's also, in this other bucket with Zach Thornton. And then number 17 on my list, RJ Gordon, another guy that had a great season in 2025, 13th round pick in 2024. So this was his first full season in the Mets system. Split the year between high A and AA and pitched to a 3.36 ERA with a strikeout rate of 27%. His strikeout per 9 was in double digits at both Brooklyn and Binghamton. But what's really impressive is he cut that walk rate almost in half. 4.1 walks per 9 in Brooklyn, 2.2 walks per 9 in Binghamton. So the control even ticked up a bit once he got up to a higher level. He sits 92 to 94 with the fastball, but what stands out is the ability to locate his breaking pitches. He landed his slider and curveball for a strike more than 70% of the time this past season. He's got a splitter, which is a good pitch, but he'll still be vulnerable to left-handed pitching unless he can improve that splitter or maybe add a changeup instead if the splitter's not working for him. So he still needs to figure out the arsenal against lefties. That's something that can be worked out, but it's definitely a little bit of a hole in the game. And then the question is, can he last at 92 to 94 with that fastball, or can he tick up a little bit more? Can he sit 94 more often? Because if he can, then I can really see a big league starter here. You can get away with a lack of velocity a little bit more as a lefty than a righty, because as a righty, those left-handed power hitters in the big leagues are just going to wear out, pitchers that are, righties that are sitting 92. It's a tougher profile. But again, he could tick up that velocity to 94, 95. And we've seen prospects in the Met system adding velo. If he can do that, the breaking balls are really exciting. The fact that he has such a good feel for the slider and curveball, it could be a very well-rounded arsenal. Just, again, improving that splitter and improving that fastball. If he can unlock that, you got a 4-pitch mix that could really make him a viable big league starter that, again, could be on the cusp not too long from now. Finished the year in AA and had a lot of success. So he'll probably return to AA, but a guy that could be in Syracuse in 2026, and then you're a phone call away. So a lot of promising pitching in the New York Mets system. I got 3 more prospects to round out the top 20. And also, we're going to talk about the non-tender deadline. Who did the Mets cut? Who got cut around the league? We're going to go through all of it in just a minute. Rounding out my list of the top 20 prospects in the Mets system, I got a catcher and 2 relief pitchers. We're going to start off with the catcher who checks in at number 18, Giovanni Rodriguez. Giovanni Rodriguez was the big ticket international free agent a year before Elian Pena. He signed for $2.85 million in 2024. Fellow Venezuelan catcher, just like Francisco Alvarez, who signed for a very similar signing bonus way back. You look at Giovanni Rodriguez. He struggled in his first season in the DSL in 2024. He posted a 715 OPS at 17 years old. The Mets decided to keep him in the Dominican Summer League in 2025. He had much better results, improved that OPS by over 200 points, 939 OPS. He hit 331 with a 446 on base percentage, a 493 slugging percentage. He's a good defensive catcher. Scouts think he can make it at the position long term. So it's really just going to be a matter of the bat if he can actually be a starting catcher or more of a backup profile. And we'll see what it looks like when he comes stateside, because that's a whole other jump. If I remember correctly, Diverson Gutierrez, I can't remember where his breakout came from. I know he had a rough first year in the DSL, or maybe it was let me pull it up real quick instead of just talking out of school. What I'm trying to remember here is if Gutierrez was a similar track where it was 2 years in the DSL, second year much better, and the complex league he struggled. So going back to Diverson Gutierrez, 2023 struggled in the DSL, 2024 it was up to St. Lucie, 15 games played the complex league where he put up some good numbers, and also 14 games played in the Dominican Summer League that year as well. So he had good numbers in the DSL, then got up to the complex, and then even finished the year in St. Lucie in 2024. This past year, first full season in St. Lucie, Diverson Gutierrez really struggled at 671 OPS. So it's a tough jump. It really is. We'll see what happens with Giovanni Rodriguez, but I think his second season in the Dominican Summer League, combined with the signing bonus and the way he was valued as an international free agent with the defensive ability, I felt like he deserved some inclusion in the Mets top 20 prospect list. And ultimately, when you still have a guy that has a potential future outcome of being a big league starting catcher, I'm going to rank that higher than a reliever. But if you're looking at big league impact, guys that could help the Mets as soon as this upcoming season, you get to the final 2 guys on my top 20, Dylan Ross and Ryan Lambert. Dylan Ross, I was clamoring for him all throughout August and September, just because the Mets bullpen I thought could use another arm, and the Mets had to protect Dylan Ross from the Rule 5 draft. They did that by adding to the roster in the final weekend of the season. He never did get into a game. But you're talking about a guy that throws really hard, 13th round pick in 2022, but he was dealing with Tommy John at that point. I think he got it before he got drafted, but then he had a revision surgery in 2023. So Dylan Ross, who got selected in 2022, did not throw an inning until the very end of 2024, and it was just one inning to get back on the mound. This was his first season pitching for the New York Mets. He had a great year. Started in high A, had a 1.54 ERA and 11 2/3 innings pitched. They bumped him up the double. Pitched to a 4.35 ERA, but the stuff was still playing, 18 strikeouts in 10 1/3 innings pitched. Gets up to Syracuse and pitched to a 1.69 ERA in 32 innings. His fastball average is 98, but he can get it over 100. Has a nasty splitter that he pairs with it that sits in the low 90s. Good slider as well. So you have a 3-pitch mix and a really high potential for swing and miss. Problem, like any reliever with good stuff, is getting that good stuff in the zone. Walk rate of 15% in AAA. The Mets' new pitching coach, Justin Willard, his mantra is throw nasty stuff in the zone. He's got the nasty stuff. Can he land it in the zone? If he does, Dylan Ross could be a huge piece in the Mets bullpen in 2025, as could Ryan Lambert, although he's got a little more development to do because he needs to really get a second pitch, but he has a great fastball. Talking, scouts are saying 70 grade fastball. That's on the 20/80 scale. If you've heard me say grades at a certain point throughout the show today, scouts grade prospects on a 20-80 scale, 20 obviously lowest, 80 highest value. So 70 grade is a very, very good fastball. Lambert pitched to a 1.62 ERA in high A and double A combined. He had a 1.71 ERA in double A, where he spent more of his season, 42 of his 50 innings, coming in double A, struck out 64 in those 42 innings. Again, fastball's elite, sits 97, gets great carry, plenty of whiffs up in the zone. Needs to work on that slider a little bit more, as well as the command. But if that slider can, have it, it's a little bit of an improvement if he can land it for a strike a little bit more. That command can improve overall. Again, another guy that has high leverage reliever potential. I love Ryan Lambert when the Mets selected him. He was sort of my sneaky favorite pick of the 2024 draft for the Mets. Obviously, Carson Bench, great first round pick, but just sort of an under the radar guy. You love the guys that just throw cheese, and that's what Ryan Lambert does. So it's going to be interesting to see if he starts the year in AAA, how he fares, and how they kind of round out that arsenal. But a really exciting arm that the Mets have in the system that, again, I could see making an impact in 2026, probably more second half, where Dylan Ross has a chance to break camp if he has, obviously a lot of success in Port St. Lucie once we get to spring training. Just missed. We'll probably do a show on these guys, but just some names to watch. I'm not even get into them too much because I think I'll do a full show on it at some point. Eli Serrano, toolsy outfielder, but still has to put it all together. Jonathan Pintaro on the 40-man roster did not have a lot of success after he came up with the Mets, but he still struck out a bunch of batters. Just the ERA was sort of ballooning throughout the second half of the season. Boston Barrow had a disappointing year, but definitely still a guy to keep your eye on. Infield prospect. Trey Snyder, another one. Colin Houck, Jeremy Rodriguez. There's a lot of these guys that didn't have the best of seasons in 2025. Although with Colin Houck, former first-round pick, he was a disaster in 2024, and he really had a much better season in 2025. So good strides there. Again, we will spend a full show on that at some point this offseason, or at least a good segment where I can really dive into those guys a little bit further. Non-tenders. All right, the Mets made 3 cuts today. We knew of 2 of them, I believe, when I recorded yesterday's show, Danny Young and Max Kranick. The third one, Jose Castillo. Jose Castillo, the Mets made a waiver claim on him this offseason. Of course, he had 2 stops with the Mets this past year, and then ended the year with the Orioles. Mets made a waiver claim, but he was an arbitration-eligible pitcher, projected to make over $1 million, so not a surprise that the Mets non-tendered him. And with Kranick and Young, you had plenty of control there, but relievers who were recovering from Tommy John and the Mets valued the roster spots over keeping those guys. I would not be surprised if they signed minor league deals to return with the Mets and rehab with the Mets, but they were non-tendered. A little bit surprised that we did not get a non-tender for Austin Warren. Not an arbitration-eligible player, but he does not have any options. So just an interesting guy to keep on the 40-man roster. I think he'll probably end up off of the 40-man at some point throughout the offseason once you get free agent additions, things of that nature. And then Jared Young was another one I was a little bit surprised about too, just because Jared Young, didn't end up having too much of an impact with the Mets, and I thought that they might let him go to a different team, but they still hold an option over him, still not an arbitration-eligible player. So again, another guy that could find his way off the roster at some point, but for now, he remains with the New York Mets. Not a lot of big names around Major League Baseball to talk about. Alek Manoah is a big name, but he got non-tendered. He was with the Braves. I guess they made a waiver claim on him earlier in the offseason, but they non-tender him. Let's see if there's any other names that jump out here as I'm going through. Reese McGuire, a catcher. Evan Phillips, that's a little bit of an interesting one. He got Tommy John surgery, though. So I guess they and only one more year of club control, protracted arbitration number of $6.1 million for the Dodgers. So it makes sense. But Evan Phillips, really good reliever. Not a bad guy to take a shot on and bring him aboard to rehab with you and get the upside if you get a second year on that deal. Joey Lucchesi, surprising non-tender, had a great season with the Giants, a 3.76 ERA, but they did not want to pay his arbitration number, which is only $2 million. Poor guy, man. He had such a great season. You go through the list. There's really not anybody else in the National League that stands out. A couple of former Mets, Alex Canario, who everyone was clamoring for at the end of spring training last year, did not have a good year in Pittsburgh and is now cut into free agent again. Colin Holderman in the Daniel Vogelback trade. We talked about him a couple days ago when he was DFA'd. So that's the list. Michael Toglia, the guy that hit 3 home runs, the Rockies' first baseman against the Mets in 2024, he got cut. The big one in the American League was Adolis Garcia. That was the biggest name that got non-tendered. Big arbitration number for him. So the Rangers, who are looking to shed some salary this offseason, they cut bait with him and Jonah Heim, who had been their catcher during that World Series run in 2023. Those two guys got non-tendered, and they really were the two standouts from the American League. But not a lot to discuss there as far as potential free agent fits for the Mets. None of those guys really fit the picture. Adolis Garcia, sure, you'd say, oh, well, big name, but what are the Mets going to do with him? They have locked up corner outfield spots anyway, and the guy's been on a decline for the last couple of years. That's why he was non-tendered. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. I am happy that I kept this show under 40 minutes because when you are trying to break down 10 prospects in one show, it can be tough, especially when you add in the non-tenders, to keep the show under 40. So little tip of the hat to myself there for not speaking too long on a Saturday for all you that are tuning in. Do appreciate everyone who gave this show a weekend listen. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back on Monday. Make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.